Welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind. I'm a serial entrepreneur and social innovator. I like to gather people from all different walks to talk about what I call the conscious economy. I believe that we can create a more equitable system, one that honors the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of business, and includes art and creativity. Join us each week as we tackle a different intersection of this big but critical conversation. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I am your host, Rhiannon Rosalind, and I do want to just acknowledge that we're in our new studio space. This is our Moon Manor space, and we're really excited to be broadcasting to you from this space. So checking out the new art and the new location. I know so many of you have been so used to where we've always been, so this is an exciting time and the first episode that we get to shoot here. So that's very exciting. And today I'm joined by someone that I have so much respect for, and I'm so excited to actually sit down and have this conversation. So Khalidah Bello, she is a social innovator. She's an art activist. I would definitely define you as one, and the CEO of Ogatawa. And so welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
It's such an honor to be here in this gorgeous space as a person who really loves the arts and is supporting that. It's such a positive reflection of how beautiful the arts can enhance and enrich our experiences.
It's so true. And so that kind of gets me started. We always like to ask our guests, how did you get into this world of art and activism and combining those two, using art as a tool for social innovation? Where did this come from in you? How did you end up on this journey? Tell us your story of who you are and how you got here.
Thanks so much for asking and giving me the opportunity to share. So I grew up in a high needs area. So one of Toronto's strong neighborhoods as it's defined now. And the two of those neighborhoods, the Jane Finch community as well as the Rexdale community. Mm-hmm. And they're predominantly BIPOC in terms of the community makeup. And while I was younger in my teens, I really noticed the way that art was is an escape mechanism for youth who were troubled at the time or having challenges with engaging in the formal education system. Mm-hmm. But when they were able to harness their talents, right, and utilize the arts that they were able to create, this really helped to get folks back on track. And that could be through spoken word. It was through rapping, hip hop at the time. It was really, really gathering a lot of momentum in terms of being able to speak to people's experiences. Yes. And then it was also artistic disruption of spaces, right, with graffiti art.
Yes.
And so I saw how powerful that was in being able to help people stay aligned with, having their purpose realized through their talents.
Yes.
And that really motivated me to start to really consider how we can utilize arts in a productive way to help bridge the gap with BIPOC community, folks who are on the fringes or who are disenfranchised, and enable them to be able to have economic, enhancement in terms of their lifestyle to be able to make a living for themselves with their art. Because I saw that happen and how the folks were really able to change their lives around. Mm-hmm. And so I also reflected on the challenges that the Black community has in terms of representation. When I was growing up, it was really hard to see our community reflected in positive ways. We're often looking to the US to kind of get perspective from America in terms of self-identity. And I saw the impact on the emotional well-being and mental health of my community, and saw the impact of visual representation on self-confidence of young people. And so fast forward to today, when in looking at the ways in which we are able to harness the arts to make a positive impact, we know that it can help people in terms of their emotional well-being and mental health. It's been proven. There's lots of research to back it up. Yes. It's been done at York University, this type of research as well. And we know that that's going to be a positive outcome, right, of the challenges that the Black community faces in terms of being able to feel included in the community at large. And then really important when we think about the UN Sustainable Development Goals is looking at how we can empower people economically. So if people can tap into their creative talents and be able to make a living out of that, they can take care of themselves, their families, and their communities. So that's how we see art as being able to help, but also expanding beyond the community that's the Black community, BIPOC community. And when we do that, we're able to then assist in bridging the cultural divide, right? So that's something that we see as being very positive in terms of anti-racist approaches to, using art as a lever to increase understanding.
Well, it really does connect people, and it allows people into a conversation that maybe otherwise wouldn't be there, which is so beautiful.
Absolutely.
And I love that you are playing within all of these different mediums of art. So in talking to you, I know that you've been sort of, envisioning this particular project. Do you mind, or are you open to telling us a little bit about this particular project that you've been envisioning?
Yes.
And then we can get into the medium, because I think it's a really, really important one. So I'm going to let you reveal it. Yes.
Absolutely. So as we think about representation and the Black Lives Matter movement and standing in solidarity with the Black community, we know that representation matters too, and reclaiming spaces and for our representation in those spaces so that we can feel more included as a community in our broader community at large. And when we look at public art, right, and look around the Greater Toronto area, we recognize that we're not as represented in permanent ways with, public installations that would last decades. So it's really uplifting to see the graffiti art that comes that is shown on buildings and the way that we're represented there. And City of Toronto does a great job in engaging the Black community in Nuit Blanche and things like this. Artworks TO is another example. And there are a number of situations whereby it's a temporary installation, right? So how can we be more permanently represented? And then when we were looking at the unfortunate aftermath of the George Floyd murder, it was a positive aspect where folks kind of had this sense of wokenness, right? About the exclusion and the exclusion of Black people and the oppression. But we also saw a lot of folks taking that frustration out on public art and people tearing down statues that they felt were representing oppressive values. Right. So as we see that happening, we thought, it's appropriate for us to have statues that represent Black excellence, right? So that we can celebrate the leadership. Thank you.
I really love this. I love where you're going with this. And so that is what it is. It's you working to erect statues in the city that would be representative of incredible, iconic Black leaders.
Absolutely.
Historic figures, current and past.
Absolutely. And so we really want this to be a community-led initiative whereby the community helps us to decide who would be commemorated with these statues. And when we look around Toronto, we haven't identified any full-figure life-size statues in the Toronto area. And that's surprising because Toronto's the most diverse city in the world.
Absolutely.
Right? And the Black community has been around for over 400 years. And this is not something that I think folks normally think about, right? We kind of tend to think about the Black community in terms of the Underground Railroad, right? And the movement from the US, but there's been presence right from before Canada was known as Canada. And I think that that's something that helps our race relations as well.
Yes.
For us to understand that we've been contributing not just to our own community and helping the sustainability and the improvement of our own community, but Canada as a whole.
Yeah, I think it's such an amazing project. And again, we've been seeing this issue pop up in the news around, who is represented in these forms of art, in these statues. Right. I think specifically right now to X University, formerly known as Ryerson.
Right.
And I think about that whole movement around, even the name change of the university and what that represents. So I love that you are taking these more traditional mediums and then you're infusing them with the social identity of now. And this is the current conversation that we are all having.
Right.
Yes, George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd and the movement that, ensued from that moment did spark something in the global consciousness, in the sort of North American consciousness for sure. But that story has been growing and that pain has been more visible.
Absolutely.
And has had more of a space in the public square, I would say, in the last couple of years. And now we're seeing this movement. Now we're seeing this enlightenment.
Yes.
And so the art has to reflect that because the art reflects our social values.
It does.
And so as we progress in our social values as a society, to have that reflection in all ways, but especially in these ways that feel more traditional and baked in just these more formal institutional representations, this is so progressive.
Oh, thank you.
In its traditional nature. Yeah. And I just love it so much. So I know when you told me about it, I just was so excited and so excited to see a leader like yourself who's had the experience that you've had and then been able to shape it into this beautiful, beautiful work, community-centered, involving people. It's so new economy. It's so conscious economics, which is why we just wanted to have you here today. So with that, we've got a lot of listeners who are, social change makers, who are artists, who are community creators in the city and beyond. And I know that it can be a challenging role. When you're trying to be on the pointy edge of progress, you and I have talked about this.
Yes.
When you're on the pointy edge of progress, you can get cut up sometimes because you're trying to break through those glass barriers. You're trying to break through and create something new. Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now back to the episode. What is your experience in terms of, doing this work? What is hard about it? What comes more naturally? Like if you could just be really honest, because I think that so many of us, we see only one perception that, oh, well, this person has, conceptualized this and now it's coming to life and it must be easy, but it's not. And so I want to really honor the spectrum of what it takes to envision something like this and then nurture it into being and just understand that process from your perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you for creating the space to have that conversation about the challenge that can come along with the vision. I think that it's really sometimes what is challenging is to let people know about what's hidden in plain sight, right? And so for the community, when it comes to artists, entrepreneurs, and like the popularity of other mediums and the ways in which the Black community or Black artists have been able to make a way for themselves, maybe through music or, in sports, right? There's some progress there, but it's still a long way that we need to go. But the challenge of Black artists to be able to be commissioned for their artworks and to have permanent installations, which are using the medium of bronze, right? And the expense that they experience or the limitation in being able to afford the expense of creating works in bronze and the way that ends up limiting what we see in our public spaces, that conversation in terms of having folks kind of have a great understanding of that or come to the knowledge of that's a little bit challenging too, to kind of bring forward and have like accepted, because we recognize that, Toronto is very diverse and there's this perception that, things are that people would have the access, that institutions that are available to celebrate or to support everyone are doing that. But I think that it's been really helpful in this reckoning that has happened, whereby there's institutions that are being very transparent about the shortcomings that they've experienced. So that's kind of helping to alleviate some of those challenges, and as it relates to the having the problem addressed as it is, like a challenge that is. And I think that the other aspect too is really as a rising organization, that's volunteer led, trying to rally the support of corporations,
multiple stakeholders,
and around what is a really, really, promising initiative can be challenging too, right? And so we're really wanting to support emerging artists because we think that that's really critical to give room and space for new voices to be expressed in terms of their artistic talents. And that can be difficult, right?
Yeah.
So as you're emerging and trying to support emerging talent, that has its challenges. And so I know that sometimes leaders they're really eager to support and they may commit initially, but then sometimes the follow through can be challenging, which I see happens in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, I think it happens in just the startup industries in general. Anytime you're starting up a new project, especially if you're the one that has conceptualized that or has been the one, and it's not that other people haven't thought about it, but you've taken the initiative to say, no, I'm going to dedicate my time, my energy to this. And so when you're spearheading something like that, first of all, there's a sensitivity that happens when we're putting ourselves out there and we're trying to gather folks around and educate people as to why this is so important. And the medium is the message here.
Yes.
The medium is the message.
Marcia McLuhan said it.
Yes. And it's so true.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Again, it's this idea of where are we willing to pay for Black art and where are we not as a society? Where are we not willing to invest?
Absolutely.
And why is it that, and it's really interesting, and I don't know how you feel about this comment, but I'm going to make it. I think that sometimes the folks that are in the decision-making roles are not representative of the community. And so what ends up happening is they have a perception of what them financing a piece of Black art could or should be, and they want it to be boxed into this more traditional representation as opposed to this new form. And I don't know if you've experienced that or if you've seen that happening, where it's almost like, and I see this again with even our public funding for these kinds of pieces, like through government granting and whatever else, which we're appreciative of. But at the same time, sometimes the folks who are deciding what are the conditions for that grant, they are people who aren't actually representative of the community that now they're trying to serve. So there is this disconnect, which means that it requires leadership and bridge builders like yourself that are willing to bridge the community and the artists and talk about why it's so important to work with those emerging artists, but also be able to educate the folks on the other side who want to support and help, but may have their own idea of what that looks like. And in this progressive new economy, we need to say, no, we want to be able to see the actual creators create what's coming from them and be able to have that representation in new mediums and new forms where we haven't seen ourselves before, because that is the new economy. So I'm kind of making these statements. I don't know how you feel about this, or if you have anything to add there, or
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, there's so much. I know we have a finite time, but I could talk about that indefinitely for sure. So in terms of Black art, I think that sometimes folks may not be in terms of how it's valued, right? And the cost of it, making statues is quite expensive, right? And getting emerging artists to work on that in a mentorship sort of fashion so that they build this talent and it stays with them is costly. And I think that perhaps folks are not as accustomed to having large price tags on Black art, right? Especially in Canada. So I think that the imagery of how much it should be invested and trying to translate that to the outcomes. Sometimes there's so many intangibles that, you know, are hard to like put to a dollar value, right? And so that is difficult in terms of how people perceive the value that Black art that they've encountered, you know, how they perceive that it should be, and what the potential is when we look internationally, right? So that is a huge, like that is a big disconnect that we're trying to bridge. And also folks are not as ready for the number of stories that we want to, like, sometimes there's hesitation with regards to the number of stories we want to tell. So we're hoping to create a statue garden of about 20 to 25 figures.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so fabulous. And when we look at other representations in the city, like there's sports stars like that are represented in more than 10, right? And it was done in a very short period of time, recent times as well. But when folks are thinking about doing this in the Black community, it's like, oh, is that's a bit much, right? So I think that in terms of thinking recognition of the impact of the stories and the way that can be visualized. I think that there may be limitations in the way that it's currently being perceived. And then when we're looking at the way grants occur and the support that happens, it's very people led, right? The work. And I think there's some sort of there's hesitation in traditional funders to want to be supportive of operations so that you can be able to appropriately implement the projects, and that can be limiting
This is hugely limiting, and especially now because we've seen this influx of support, which is great. You know, we've seen this influx of support, new grants, new opportunities available to Black creators, to Black artists, to Black community leaders. But at the same time, there are these barriers because there is a lot of new startups in the space that are mobilizing that may not have some of the, you know, history that is required. Or there's all of these little roadblocks. And again, I think in the spirit of social change, in the spirit of people really understanding, you know, what it feels like to run these organizations, and to not also be discouraged and think that, you know, when you see the successful people, oh, I can't be there as well. Yes, you can. And that's why I think it's important that we talk about these things and know that these challenges exist. And the more that we talk about them and the more that we come together, the more we can transform them as well. And it is all transforming and evolving. And it's so exciting to me. Like, I could jump up and down on this seat just about the idea of having that statue garden and having that kind of representation and the story and the interweaving stories of what you will create and what that will mean for generations to come, to be able to see that in bronze, you know, they're permanent. That is so, so spectacular. And I think that a lot of us who have been on the front lines of, you know, the equity movement and the social change movement, we worry that sometimes some issues come up and it's finally like people get it, and then we worry that we're a news cycle and that it's going to go away. This is permanent and lasting change. And that's what I love so much about it, the spirit of it. So just to end off, where can we find more about you and your organization, and how can we get involved? Because I'm sure there's lots of people that want to. So where and how, and tell us, you know, a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I would say definitely we encourage folks to follow us on our socials. We're Ogotawa at Facebook and Instagram, as well as on TikTok.
Sweet.
Yes. And there's ogotawa.ca where we have information about like upcoming events. And we're really excited to have a community consultation to help understand what the community feels about, you know, the opportunity to have these statues in our public spaces. And we're going to be switching the way information flows, as we're getting information from African experts on the continent to help us understand like the tradition of statue creation in bronze over hundreds of years, and the way that we can benefit from that here in Canada. And there's going to be computer animation. We're going to have augmented reality and just like a music video release. And it's going to help us to really immerse ourselves in the potential for this work for the Black future, with our trailblazers represented in Toronto, and to be able to see the way that we've all benefited from their excellence. So that the event that's coming up is March 26th and March 27th on Zoom. And we're just really wanting to get a diverse amount of feedback, and perspective from the community. So I think those are definitely great ways to stay connected.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And to just end off, is there one piece of advice that you would give to someone watching right now that has a dream, that has an idea, that wants to get involved and doesn't know where to start?
Yeah, I would say that it's really important to, be true to your passion, right? And to, build your community, right? So for me, it's been really, really important to identify like-minded folks who have done it before and that can offer some kind of guidance and mentorship, just to be able to identify organizations and leaders who are doing the kind of work that you want to do, and sit at their feet, be humble. How do they do it? What is their advice? LinkedIn for me, in terms of reaching out to folks that I don't know, right? And building the connections that we seek to make, because our community, we're not always as networked, right? But don't be afraid, I would say, to try to share your initiative or your goal with someone who is in the place where you want to go with your dream, and who can potentially give advice that could really help you accelerate. That's been
amazing.
Key.
I love that. And yeah, I think that is such great advice, and just to get out there and try. Just get out there and try and start talking about it, and, test it in the marketplace by having a conversation with folks.
Absolutely.
And that's a beautiful way. And I know that's how you and I started. It was just a simple conversation. And now I've been watching you, and we're so proud of you at Conscious Economics. We're so excited for this project. We are supportive of it 100%.
Thank you.
And it was just an honor to have you here today. So thank you so much.
I'm so grateful to be involved.
Thank you to all of you who were tuning in today to this episode. We'll link all of these incredible resources below so you can get involved. And thank you for tuning in. So please rate and subscribe, leave us your comments, and we'll see you again next week. This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.